their video if they need to. But in case you don't, to the left-hand side, there is a little microphone. And when it's got the line through it, it means that you're muted. When it doesn't, you're not. So you can go over there with your cursor and unmute it and speak. We're going to keep to start the meeting, you'll be all muted, and I will be muted in a second. And then Gianpaolo is going to speak. And if you want to ask a question, on the bottom, there is this little orange box that says chat. If you've got a question or you've got a comment you want to make, put it in the chat while Gianpaolo is speaking. And then after that, we can bring it all back. When we get into our small groups, we will all be able to unmute ourselves and we'll be able to have discussions. So that after we have a bit of a question comment time, we'll go into individual chat rooms, and this will happen automatically. And we'll have an opportunity to talk for 10-15 minutes or so. And we'll talk about next steps. We'll talk about questions that came up. It's really a pretty free-flowing discussion that we'd like to do. There will be people who are assigned as co-hosts will be taking notes. And then when we come back, we will report back and then have a little bit of discussion around that. And so unless if there's any chat question that anybody has about the technology, which David will probably answer more than me, are we okay on the technology? Okay, good, thumbs up, okay. So in that case, let's move on. Many of you know Gianpaolo Baiocchi because he was our main speaker for the forum that we held about a year ago now. It seems longer than that, but everything seems longer than that right now. And he's a professor and director of the Urban Democracy Lab at N.Y.U. He was keynote speaker for our Municipal Socialism conference, and he is the co-author of A Case for a Rent Moratorium, which was published earlier this year in the New York Times. So I'm going to turn it over to Gianpaolo, and we'll start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Susan, and so nice to see everyone. I really super happy and flattered to be with you today. Like all of you, I'm experiencing this time as a kind of like, you know, as Susan was saying, a strange time where the perception of time is weird, the days blend into each other, we get these weird news. Sometimes I get very hopeful things in my inbox. I participate in Zoom meetings. Anyways, it's disconcerting. One of the things I've been trying to do in the last few weeks is to keep up and connect with people who are doing such important and amazing work like you all are. So I'm actually here mostly to hear about what you've been up to and what you think and what things look like from your point of view. So when I was thinking about what just a couple of things to put on the table, I thought I would talk a little bit about the cancel rent movement that I've been part of, and I talk a little bit about the organizing at the Amazon warehouses that's happening here in New York and many other places in the US as well. So like Susan was saying, on one hand, this is you know, I like the phrase that someone used recently that the COVID virus is an X-ray that has been showing where all the fractures and the nastiness is in our societies. And New York is a place where you can see the obscenity of our private housing system on full display. You know, every night there's more than 100,000 people who are homeless in the city. So many of one of the reasons that the public schools were held open as long as they did was because they couldn't figure out a way to feed all the kids that depend on public schools for lunch. And at the same time, it's a city with 250,000 empty apartments at any one time for speculation. It's a city really of tremendous wealth and tremendous inequality at the same time. And, you know, the first moment, and as you all know, I'm close to housing justice kind of work. First thing, you know, when COVID hit was people organized into mutual aid networks. People really stepped up in a pretty amazing way, very quickly putting buildings in neighborhoods together. There was this very nice hashtag called "We Got Our Neighborhood" or "We Got Our Block," and people knew that there were gonna be economic consequences and social consequences. But I think people were surprised at how quickly the bottom fell out for so many folks. And very quickly, the discussion turned to many people can't pay rent to no one should pay rent. And so around mid-March, the cancel rent idea started to pick up steam. Someone asked me to write an editorial around what would it cost and the kind of it's not a radical editorial, but the argument for federally supporting renters. And, you know, Jake and I quickly wrote it sort of like back of the envelope, and we were shocked that a liberal and not radical outlet like the New York Times was willing to publish it. And they told us, well, there were several pieces that came in, and yours was the most moderate and mild mannered. So that gives you a sense of how things have been moving. So about a third of people, renters nationwide, didn't pay rent. And now we're organizing here in New York and many other cities. There's strong organizing committees in at least 100 cities in the US today. No one knows how many people won't be able to pay rent. No one knows how big the rent strike is going to be. But one thing that's emerged and I think this is a hopeful thing. So, you know, there's this kind of like leftist idea sometimes that things getting worse is good for us. Things getting worse is bad for us because the people who suffer are our people most of the time. But when times get worse is when we show our might in taking care of each other and in making big demands. And the thing that's been amazing about this sort of amorphous campaign, you know, now has 2 or 3 different sort of national polls around this cancel rent, is just how expansive and big the demands have become. So, you know, getting people through to June and getting their rents paid is, of course, an immediate demand. But what happens in June, even if we want a 90-day rent moratorium? You know, we can't go back to this absurd housing system. So I'm looking here. I can send this around in the chat box. One of the national coalitions called Housing Justice for All. It has a 5 or 6 point set of demands. So one of them, that's interesting one, is that canceling rent needs to be universal and not based on what policymakers call means testing. So means testing is this idea that, you know, to get expanded unemployment benefits, like in the CARES Act, first of all, you have to have a Social Security number. Second of all, you have to be able to prove that you lost your job due to COVID. By some estimates, at least 11 million workers couldn't get unemployment benefits because they don't have Social Security numbers. So one of the things that's emerged very strongly in the cancel rent is that cancel rent needs to be universal. One of the things, and this is one of the dangers, I suspect, one of the things that people worry about is that in the middle of the Democratic Party machinery, there is a proposal for housing vouchers, but only for certain people. If you can prove unemployment, if your income is a certain band, but also depending on immigration status. And one of the things that the cancel rent movement has been very strong about is that this is a big intersectional, multi-generational movement. And its first demand is that it needs to be universal. The demands include forgiveness for all utilities, protection for renters. And then the next set of demands is like, okay, we can't go back after simply having their rents covered. We need to think about not just bailing out landlords, but buying out slumlords, reclaiming some of these distressed assets for social housing, thinking about what an actual humane and rational housing policy anchored in some of these very basic common sense social democratic principles. And one of the interesting things at some of these housing meetings that I've attended, like you know, they all begin with 15 minutes of tech trouble. It really is like, you know, especially when you're doing intergenerational organizing and there's people with differential access to computers. Sometimes there's 5 people to a computer. We spend a lot of time troubleshooting Zoom, and everyone's a little worried that our meetings are being recorded for no good reason. But one of the things that's been amazing to see is this very strong kind of utopian, anti-capitalist sort of sentiment around people who are otherwise pretty traditional tenant leaders who, you know, rent protections and decent landlords. Everyone is sort of doing the math, and it's like, okay, even if everyone got their rent paid for 3 months, that's not a solution. The big picture is coming into focus. So that's a very exciting thing. People are moving from big demands to asking for structural changes. And one of the things too that I think is interesting about the moment is that people are thinking pretty hard about the kinds of policies that move us that way. In other words, now that it's on the table to turn, you know, we want 20% of housing in the US to be social housing, say. What kinds of mechanisms and tools are there in the books? And people are doing pretty exciting research. You know, mayors can use eminent domain. There's different legislation about giving community the first refusal when a distressed asset is sold. There's anti-warehousing legislation, so take over some of these empty apartments. So it's big structural demands, but it's anchored in people thinking about what are feasible policies that move us in that direction. As I've said, one of the other things that's super exciting too is I've in my 48 years of living on this planet, and I've been fortunate to be part of different political moments in Brazil and in the US, I've never seen anything quite like this. This real sort of organizing that is so plural, you know, and people talk about this is an intersectional movement. You know, housing affects everybody very distinctly, but there is a common cause. The socialist idea that we're all different, but that there are common solutions that could benefit the majority of us really seems to be being borne out. Another thing that's interesting, and I'm guessing will become even more apparent, is, you know, Susan was opening with the sad disappointment of the person who is the non-Republican candidate for president. Our elected officials on the Democratic side are going to have to be accountable for some of these decisions. You know, Jake and I, we were asked by the AOC people to do some scenario sketching and legislative research around this and a couple of other policies. And just from those conversations we have a sense like, I always thought Democrats were centrist, but it feels worse. You know, it feels like there is an addiction to giving corporate handouts. Um, and I feel like there's going to be some kind of accounting that needs to take place. And I feel like those kinds of questions, you know, New York is like Massachusetts. There's only one political party, apparently, and it's sort of a done deal. There's been a lot of challenges within the Democratic Party framework in New York, and you know, maybe challenges from outside, from the left at some point. A final thing I'll say: if you want to be inspired, another place that I've been looking and keeping up with is you can look up the Amazonians United, and there's also this very nice organization called Athena that's bringing warehouse workers and Amazon workers in particular together. And if you look at the kinds of demands that they're making, they are about workplace conditions, they're about workplace control, they're about workplace and community, but they're also very interestingly about environment and climate change. You know, one of the Jeff Bezos had this thing a couple of months back, you know, the famous Amazon pledge to be carbon neutral and buy electric cars and all this stuff. What people don't talk about is the shop floor demands, which preceded that. For example, I think it's called Amazon Workers for Environmental Justice, AWE. I can put the acronym in the chat box. One of the things they have been demanding is a full carbon accounting of Amazon. So it turns out Amazon puts out as much carbon as Denmark. And, you know, it was a workplace struggle and demand that forced Jeff Bezos to say he was going to buy electric cars. And now if you look at the stuff that the Amazonians United is demanding and putting together, it's transformative. And it's, you know, it feels like if someone figures out a way to connect those movements, you know, Amazon workers with the housing movement, with the demands that public teachers are beginning to make, and trying to take some of this goodwill that exists towards frontline workers and turn it into something else, I feel like we're going to be living in a very exciting moment. I didn't talk about the dangers, but I suspect I was invited to talk positive things. So I hope you forgive me that. Anyways, I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you're all up to and your thoughts and reactions and what you see as possibilities. I'll put myself on mute now.
So we'd like to encourage people to now have questions or make comments in regard to the things that we've talked about thus far. Thoughts?
Dave, do you want to start this off?
Well, I'll say something. You know, I've been thinking a lot about electoral politics is really slow moving. We need to elect a whole bunch of AOCs. That's going to take a long time. On the other hand, some of the strikes that we've seen in the last year have been amazing. And what the Amazon folks are doing now and some of the nurses and some of the other frontline workers, I think the way to tie those two movements together is to start a national strike fund so that we can actually support these people who are going out on strike, because strikes, I think, and then we hold the Democrats responsible. We say to the Democrats, if this next bill doesn't cover the stuff we need, we're going out on the streets and it's going to be, and we're putting the blame on you. And then people will feel like maybe they could do it if there was this national strike fund. You know, if the people who, all of us who gave a lot of money to Bernie and everybody else started putting money into a national strike fund, I think it could be a really powerful thing. I have no clue how to set this up, but I think it could be a really powerful tool.
Go ahead, Judy.
Judy, you're muted.
People should be able to
I did, right. So I think in the back of a lot of people's minds, just like David was saying, is this general strike idea. So I think this is one of the times where everybody is affected by this thing at the same time. And that usually doesn't happen. We have disasters, or we have plant closings, or we have struggles here and there in California or Texas or somewhere, but it never happens that we're all in the same boat together. And so I think that's why we're thinking about big picture stuff, because we're all thinking about the same things. And so I was thinking, I think there is a possibility to make these big demands all at once somehow by some sort of not a general strike or a general action. Because as David also said, this electoral stuff just isn't doing it for us, right? So yeah, that's what I had to say. Thanks.
Okay, Bob?
Sort of on that same theme, you know, I think an appreciation for what we consider an essential worker has really changed in the last month or month and a half. And you know, and it has nothing to do with being in a union or, you know, really almost what your job is. I mean, it makes me wonder about a national essential workers union or something. Yeah. I mean, the idea, I mean, people that you never even think about are suddenly so critical. And as people have walked off, we now no longer have a food distribution system, you know, and you know, we're all thanking people who come in and work stocking the shelves in our supermarkets because you know, the food is critical. So yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about, but I think of it as being the idea of an essential worker.
Anybody else? David.
Yeah, just on a little bit on some of the dangers, I think, that we have to think about. I look at the post office, and, you know, the Republicans have long wanted to destroy the postal system because it's socialism to them. And they are slowly doing that right now. They refuse the post office any funds in any of these bailouts. So I think we have to think about that ideological fight, that we have to talk to people about why it's important to defend the post office. And I think some of the other things, you know, I was thinking about Trump came out and said he's wants to reopen all the meatpacking plants. And he's going to use that military order to open them. But at the same time, you read about that they have 800 million pounds of frozen beef stored in warehouses, and 600 million pounds of pork, and, you know, 800 million pounds of chicken, frozen chicken. There's no meat shortage, but he's going to use the federal law to force workers back into working in unsafe conditions so that Tyson doesn't lose profits. So I think there's some of those battles that we really got to figure out how to raise with people and point out why socialism is better.
So, excuse me, two responses to that. One is there's also a lot of produce that's being plowed under. So you have people who don't have enough to eat and we're destroying food, which is not a new thing, but an awful thing. Another aspect of the post office is that if we're dealing with vote by mail and there's no post office, then we can't vote by mail, which is another way of suppressing the vote. So another requirement of making connection or intersectional understanding of what is about here. And another recognition that we're not all in this together. There are a lot of us who are in this together, and there are a lot of us who are doing just fine, and in fact making billions of dollars of profit. I think we do have the opportunity to make that point. And, you know, I've been pushing for a general strike for a while, and I'm still pushing for it. I think what they listen to is only economics. And so let's give them some economics to listen to. Now, what the way of doing that is, I think we can learn from what educators have done and what others who have gone out on strike have done, and think about, you know, is it one unending strike? Is it a rolling set of strikes? Is it, you know, region by region? How do we make some decisions about how to move forward? But that's what we have to offer, is really us. So let's do it. And I have to be careful about suggesting that because I'm retired. So what am I striking from?
You can be on the picket lines.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I think that's yeah. I think that these are excellent things. I think to pick up on this very last point of Douglas's and David's a little bit too. You know, there's we're not all in this together, and one of the things that I do worry about in the darker moments is that, you know, a lot of Black and brown and poor older people are going to die, and for some people that's fine. That's fewer social costs. I worry that this is going to feel like a weird validation. You know, some people in New York, for example, said, well, it wasn't that bad. I could go to my country home. I got my food delivered from Seamless. I have, you know, what is it called? Concierge healthcare, where I get a doctor on my computer and get the medicine shipped to me. I worry a little bit about that. I worry too about these, you know, David was talking about the post office. And someone will tell me who says this, but you know, this sort of elite saying that you can't waste a good crisis. You know, that they've been at the ready. People are going to try to eviscerate post offices. There's going to be huge cuts to education. Some of these governors are going to try to push through. You know, I was reading Forbes, I think. Private equity is ready to buy up homes of people who can't pay mortgages. You know, they think this is going to be a huge bonanza too. So I think this kind of like political work that you're all talking about making the case to people, and I think, you know, Judy's point that this is a special time where a lot of things are together. This might also be a special time where we might be able to reach people who might not otherwise be sympathetic to our kinds of politics. I think we have to use that time.
Heard?
Oops, I want to speak too.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, partly this has already been said, but the whole thing about food right now is that there's all this food being destroyed, but on the TV you see these mile-long lines at the food kitchens, at the food pantries. And that's getting out there in the mainstream, and it's such an obvious contradiction, and that somehow we need to capitalize on that. Wrong word, but yeah.
Dolores?
I just want to go back to the issue of voting and our civil rights. So as we're talking about all these intersectionalities, I think that's another really key issue. And when you have the nominee for, or the presumed nominee for the Democratic Party saying, if there is an election, that's a bad sign. And I think that it's, again, when we're talking about a national strike or whatever, I think we, you know, to me, we cannot allow for there not to be an election. So I just throw it into the mix.
Anyone else? Judy?
Well, again, you know, in looking at the dangers, you can see all the dangers of the big corporations using this time to, you know, put down workers and force workers back to work and force workers off of unemployment, and the big financial interests getting richer and richer, even though they're not working, but their money is just piling up. So there's that power there. And then there's the danger of the threat to the elections and the threat to the vote. So we have to think about how can we organize resistance to this power. We know it's wrong and we're scared of what they're going to do, but how are we going to take these first steps towards organizing against the bad things happening? And
Susan Triolo?
I wanted to speak about the issue of food as well. I've spoken to people at our local food bank who say that they're having to buy food because there's so much need for people right now, and the sources of donations are decreased, and the dumping of milk and all of that. Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo have put forward ideas of hiring back restaurant workers to find a way of sourcing the local produce and dairy so that instead of people standing in line for food, for boxes, that they're actually able to get food somehow to people instead of plowing it under. And I just wonder if there's a way that we can think about how to facilitate that and facilitate other conversations around getting food to people, because it's a horror, as Ferd said, to see food being plowed under. And if anyone has seen the 60 Minutes last week with Chef Andres, who is actually talking to the Congress about getting the produce to restaurants and hiring people back to actually feed people instead of these long lines of giving food away. So I just wonder if there's any way to find common ground to make something more like that happen here locally and beyond.
Okay, anybody else? I'm starting to think, and people should tell me, we're not that big a group, but I'm thinking that maybe we don't break down into a small group. We just continue this conversation. Okay, thank you, David. Okay, I got 2 Davids, I got thumbs up. Okay, go. All right, so with that, other comments that folks want to make?
Susan Milliken?
Yes, I just wanted to say that we have to be successful here, because if we're not, the corporations are going to just make things even worse. And I also fear that with Joe Biden, we kind of get a more pleasant-based Trump. And that is what's really scaring me. And, that we have to succeed this time. That's all.
Anyone else who wants to hands up or something? Ferd.
Yeah, this is really a question. And it's sort of, who is organizationally well enough situated to try to bring these movements together and to implement some of what we've been talking about, whether it's through unemployed councils or through a general strike movement or whatever, because we're still so fragmented. And I think everyone's been saying this is an opportunity to be less fragmented, but concretely, who can make this happen?
Thoughts on that?
There is the Poor People's Campaign, and that's a very big movement that has some potential that I can see.
A group that I wonder about is Franklin County Community Development Corporation. I mean, they're right down the street from us, but they have kitchens, they have freezers, and they have a lot of contacts to all of the farms around and might know if there's any farms that have excess milk or excess meat or excess vegetables or whatever. They feel like, I mean, I don't know who's situated to take this on politically, and maybe they're not a very political group, but they do have the right contacts.
I wonder what would be involved if we wanted to try to buy some of this milk that they're dumping. I mean, this is happening locally, which
Andrew
is weird.
Cuomo was talking about doing it in New York, having the state buy up the milk
Right.
and pay the processing cost and then donating it to food shelters.
Well, we certainly could talk to our state reps and senators, all of whom are really good. We talk to Joe and Paul and everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe Massachusetts would do that.
Two
Doug?
things. Yeah. First of all, I think the focus on food is right on for lots of reasons. One is it's obviously something we all need to live, but it's also the blatant contradictions are just too obvious to ignore. And thinking about how we can each region, each locale can take this on individually, but then somehow we can connect what's happening in each of those places so that it's a movement that is national, but is all sort of managed locally as much as possible. So I'm wondering, so if we take it on in Massachusetts, maybe they're taking it on in Iowa. I don't know, but we're not trying to make it all happen together, but we are making connections in terms of that happening and the need for it to happen across the country. So thinking about how we can do this locally, and I was going to also suggest we have local politicians. The third thing is, Trump has said this is a war. So there's a lot of money in the Defense Department. And if we're at war, let's go after some of that Pentagon money to fight this war. So-called.
If I, what I'm thinking that we also, one of the problems with the system as it's set up is because it's so national. So if food is coming nationally, it's almost impossible to figure out how the supply chain works. And if we could start looking more locally, I think we have a better chance of developing something that works for people as opposed to something that works for those transporting it.
We have
who spoke?
Norm. We have CISA, who in the Valley really has their hands, finger on the food supply with the local farmers. They're the ones who've right now are really working very hard to keep them going.
Yeah.
So CISA in Sunderland is the organization that can do the most.
I just wanted to say that, interestingly, in this moment, grocery stores, big grocery stores, could be allies and helpful. I was struck when Publix, which is a large grocery store chain in the South, had said they were going to buy up all milk that was being thrown, instead of having it thrown away, buy it up and process it and then distribute it for at least 2 weeks. And they were going to just take that on and do that. Now, I don't know what the scale was, whether this was just in Florida or whether where exactly it was, but it does, the grocery stores have been contributing nationally to food banks and trying to help out with redistributing food and things. And I just wonder if that wouldn't be an interesting potential alliance in this instance. And they know where the food, the food chain supply is.
This is Susan T, and I agree with you. The food banks get a lot of food from Big Y and Stop and Shop locally. And what I was told is that milk is delivered, for example, to the university in 50-pound bladders, and that the milk producers can't process it into smaller containers. So maybe there's a way that we can connect there. And also the food co-ops are also connected to the food delivery systems from outside of the area. So again, that would be possible allies.
I'd like to see if there are people who haven't spoken who would like to make a comment. Karen? You've got a look about you.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna call on me. No, actually, I'll speak for both of us. I feel like we've just been really soaking in everything you guys have said. You're far more experienced than we are, so I was hesitant to just jump in and word vomit all over everything, especially when all of you are pretty much taking the words from me. I think that we've touched on some really good things, you know, from the immediate concern of food to the bigger picture of the corporations and having money to live and eat, and then also touching on the election. And especially, I think one thing that just came into my head, which is possibly a little bit of a non sequitur, but you know, when we're talking about the post office and how that could really impact voting by mail, the first thing that went through my head was that, you know, that's assuming, right, that we have had a fair primary up till this point, which I think a lot of us question anyway. So it's almost like, well, is that just the next manifestation of a rigged election or a non-election or whatever? But I know for me, it kind of feels like the primary was very calculated, and there was coalescing, and then, you know, when you get into looking at exit polls and things like that, where the discrepancy is just huge. So that just, my mind did go there, where I'm like, well, that's a whole other thing. And I realized that, but I wanted to just put it out there. Do you want to say anything? I'm going to put him on the spot. I'm going to put him on the spot right now.
Well, to jump off from what you called your non sequitur.
Yes.
I think that we should probably be careful not to take on too much that's bigger than us, I guess. So I really like the idea of acting locally, because that is something that, regardless of who may be positioned to bring everyone together, or as close to everyone as we can get, we know we can definitely do something locally, whether that comes to fruition or not. So I guess what I'm saying is, when in doubt, attack, and I think we can. So.
And I'm all on board with the strike stuff, and the National Strike Fund, I think, is genius, because I know that, you know, I think for a lot of people who would love to go balls to the walls and go on strike, they're in fear of their livelihood getting taken away. How are they going to live? How are they going to eat? How are they going to support their children? How are they going to have a roof over their head? So if you have something like a National Strike Fund, where it's like, no, you can get out in the streets and protest, and we got you, that's a huge thing, because I think the fear and the dangling of life and death is what keeps so many workers just, you know, eyes to the ground and being thankful for the crumbs, because you feel like you have no other option.
Nancy, Joe, either of you want to chime in here? Nancy, unmute.
Let's see.
Yeah, you're unmuted now.
You're unmuted. David, can you unmute her?
I'm trying.
Here.
There.
Okay, here we go.
You're good.
Okay, Nancy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, well, I agree with, I love the strike idea, and I love the food in the groceries. But another thing that I was thinking about is when I signed up for this, there were the two things that we were supposed to read, the Naomi Klein, and then there was the letter. I don't know if other people read those. The letter that was from all those young organizations, the Sunrise, and
I don't know, there was like a list of 7 or 8 youth organizations that wrote to Biden with a list of demands for, you know, for what they can, if Biden goes with those demands and gets a vice president that they want, they will bring all kinds of money to them. So I was thinking that all of the organizations around here, we could do a similar thing. If lots of people all over the country are just repeating that beautiful letter, that's millions of people. So that's my comment.
Anyone else? Joe?
Yeah, sure. So I too read that letter and I was really moved by it. I felt very optimistic that young people were so committed to shared values. And so
right.
I really liked that. And I agreed with all the aspects of the of what they were suggesting. So I felt very encouraged by that. I also was agreeing with something that Naomi Klein was saying that I think we have to take to heart here. And that is, you know, she was saying that there was a lost opportunity, and what's happened to the left in the past has been, there's a lot of protest, but there isn't a lot of what do we do instead? What are we standing for instead? And what can we do? Like, for example, she was saying after 2008 in the you know, shut down Wall Street, there were no alternatives that were being, you know, talked about besides just stopping Wall Street. So I think that I like the idea of what's been talked about tonight about the intersectionality of housing, of food. And it's interesting to me that nobody has mentioned healthcare. And I think that one of the things that other nations have pointed to when it's come to the United States is the fact that our healthcare is tied to employment. And so lots of people will end up suffering because they don't have healthcare and will wait until the last minute. So I think that there's nothing like this kind of virus to highlight how necessary it is for us to be moving forward as a nation towards, you know, healthcare for all. So I think that the 3 places of of intersection that I think can resonate with lots of people is what was said about housing and cancel rents, strike around you know, more power and authority for the everyday worker, and healthcare. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Gianpaolo. Oh, David, you want to say something? Go ahead. David?
I was just going to say very quickly that I think someone said that we got to be figuring out the alternatives that we want to do.
Yeah.
And I was thinking around food, you know, so now for a lot of people, it's become, you know, support your favorite local restaurant and, you know, and buy gift certificates to your favorite local restaurant so they have money when they reopen. But we're still operating on a system that it's individual owners are making a profit off these restaurants. And maybe we have to think about, you know, how can you do something, a restaurant that would be community owned, community run, that would also establish us for the future, being able to deal with the food distribution system differently. So it's not just up to individual owners to decide if they're going to shut down and lay off all their employees. I think, and then just quickly, I think you're absolutely right on the Medicare for all. In Massachusetts, both Judy and I work with MassCare, the single payer coalition. And I found it very interesting. We had big plans to put a single payer question on the ballot, mainly around Boston, Easton, Massachusetts. But But, you have to be able to go out and collect signatures in order to do that. And the Democrats couldn't even figure out how to reduce the number of signatures so that people could run for office, mainly because the Democrats in the legislature are incumbents, and they didn't want to make it easier for anybody to challenge them. And so it took a court order in order to reduce the number of signatures for candidates to run in Massachusetts. But they never got around. We questioned, how about for putting questions on the ballot? And of course, they don't want to change those signature levels at all. I think Medicare for all is big. We should be pushing it right now. But again, we have those obstacles of the status quo that are opposed to it.
Gianpaolo, we're getting close to the witching hour here. So I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about what you've been hearing and in relation to what your experience is in New York and what your other conversations have been.
Oh, thank you. So it's interesting. The conversations wind up at a similar place here, which is everyone's trying to act locally in some coordinated fashion. Everyone is trying to bridge the gap between self-help and taking care of each other and making those demands and changes. So the more than one person, we've been talking about this food distribution, food issues here too. In Manhattan, there's this really weird thing because of the real estate is so expensive. And there's so much speculation around real estate that supermarkets, there's no food in Manhattan. So when the bridges break, there's food for about 48 hours because everything is outside of Manhattan because it's so expensive. So, so we have this weird situation here where, different kinds of bottlenecks and kind of no luxury options, and then landing sort of, unfortunately, people think sometimes people's imaginations wind up limited at supporting your favorite restaurant as opposed to a cooperative distribution of milk for families that need it, right? Or a direct workers cooperative to housing cooperative kind of system. So we've got to push the imagination along. I really like, as when I was with you last, I'm always so moved to hear about some of the excellent stuff that you do have, right? I mean, last time people talked to me about your very decent local politicians, which is nice to hear. I like hearing about the cooperatives. I like hearing about the kind of because I think that's what everyone's got to do, right? Got to figure out what can we do around us and move the needle and coordinate. So, the content is a little bit different, but the discussion winds up essentially in the same place. And a lot of people are kind of with you too on this issue of a general strike and the questions of who has the organizing capacity. I mean, one thing that seems to be a little bit different here, this is the last thing I'll say, is that organizations that do housing don't have the capacity at the moment to meet all the people that are wanting to organize. There's one organization I'm thinking of, a New York State-based one, upstate, downstate. They had 6,000 people on their email list 3 weeks ago, and they have over 150,000 people now. And basically the organizers are just the phone, everything's just going off the hook because people are wanting to join and wanting to get help with their landlord and what are your rights and stuff like that. So, the question of how are we going to organize it, where is our organizing capacity, who can coordinate at least all of this is really very present here too. And I think something that I heard you all talk about, which is we might be able to get unexpected allies in this moment from new places. I think is really true too. But I love being in conversation with everybody. I love the emails I get from you all. I cannot wait until it's a socialist republic out there. I would like to be, yeah. Anyway, it's always nice to be in touch with everybody there.
Yeah, we'd love to invite you back up here when we can start moving around again.
Yeah, when will that be?
Yeah.
I'll definitely show up. I'm itching to get out of these 1,100 square feet.
I'd like to kind of move us to, I want to wrap us up soon, to talking about next steps. Doug, you got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Well, this is as much a question as anything, but thinking about food as an organizing and thinking about the people who harvest the food and process the food. How are there actions we can take to support, those workers who are out in the fields who are gathering food and often who are, at the very, very, very lowest of every hierarchy, from pay to whether they're documented or who are they? Are there actions we can take as part of getting food to people in supporting the people who are actually working in the fields and gathering? I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like one of the possible action steps could be something around that.
Certainly working with the Pioneer Valley Workers Center on that stuff might be a real possibility.
There's also a Franklin County fund that's doing that, supporting workers in the field.
Oh, right.
I'll get the name of that and let people know.
Okay. Other things, other next step type of things. Next step for us too. I mean, do we want to meet again like this? Do we, I know the coordinating council will get together to talk about some of this stuff. David, go ahead. David, we can't hear you. Unmute.
I'm muted.
Okay, now there you go. You're unmuted.
Okay. We've already started getting people asking, are we going to have a general assembly? And if we are, it's supposed to be scheduled for May 3rd. How will we do that? Will it be in a big parking lot or will it be online? I think we should plan for a bigger online gathering soon and continue this conversation with more people. And I think, we've got a good beginning here of trying to get down to some concrete things we can do. So that's what I would propose.
Yeah, Alex Morris was supposed to come to our next GA, who is running for Congress, in CD1, and he's still interested in coming. I told them that we probably were not going to have a meeting May 3rd at this point, but we'd probably be scheduling something soon. So Alex wants to join us.
Susan T, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, my thought was when we're ready to, perhaps we could have a Zoom meeting with Joe, Natalie, Paul Marks, and Mindy Dom, and including Mindy because she used to run the Amher Survival Center. So she would probably have a lot of useful information about how we might approach some of these ideas we're talking about legislatively and on the ground.
Okay. Other next steps. Norm, you're unmuted. Unmute. Go ahead.
I have a problem.
You're muted. You're muted. No.
Oh,
No.
You're fine. You're done. We hear you.
I'm good. Our screen keeps freezing up. We lost everything. We can't hear everything. So I wonder if David could actually give us some tech support and because we're it's not just me. It's
What?
Yeah. Okay. I'll write to you in the chat, Norm. Okay.
Other ideas for next steps. Are we okay, Ferd?
This is this is a very small thing, but a lot of these ideas, especially these contradictions around food and housing and healthcare, lend themselves to letters to the editor, op-eds, and so forth. So I would just encourage a bunch of us to write short, pithy pieces.
Okay.
We have had a bunch of good ones lately.
We
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
True.
Right.
True. Other thoughts?
Just to touch on that a little bit, again, a small thing, but I think that when it comes to reaching a large number of people, getting a message out, information, I don't think we can overlook using social media, especially when you're trying to reach the youth, who are some of the most affected by what's happening right now. So letters to the editor, all of that is excellent, and we should all be doing that. And then at the same time, I think, you know, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the hip things are, because that will reach a broad number of people. Not that I'm any kind of social media expert by any means, but I just think that is something that we can use. It's just another tool that we have to get information, get our message, because right now, you know, one of the biggest assets, not to sound like a brat, but one of the greatest allies we have right now is we have a lot in this country of really pissed off people, you know, and they see how broken the system is, because we've been forced by this crisis to see how broken the system is. You know, some of us already knew that, but for a lot of people, this really brought a lot to light, and they can't hide from it anymore. So it could be that right now you have the best chance to really mobilize, because people are scared and they're pissed and they're desperate.
And they're at home.
And they're at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try to wind this up. Any last thoughts before we close up? Everybody has said what they want to say.
We will make the recording available on our website within a couple of days, so you can watch for it.
Okay.
So Norm, that should help you guys anyway. Comcast. Huh.
Okay, then unless we have something major at this point, I'm going to call this a meeting.
Well done.
Well done.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
You guys are awesome.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Take
Gianpaolo.
care. We'll be in touch soon.
Hi,
See you guys
Hi,
soon.
Doris.
Bye. Stay well.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Gianpaolo.
Thanks, Gianpaolo.
He's
Yeah.
gone.
Okay, this is going to be it.